Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.
Welcome to a special edition of the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Ray. So good to have you. In today's episode, we go into Trump's first 100 days in office as it pertains to energy policy in the U.S. And to do this, we have on a few guests. It's a roundtable discussion, actually, and we have on Jacki Pick from the Jacki Daily Show and the National Center for Policy Analysis. We have Dr. Lawrence Fedewa with the Washington Times, and we have Forbes contributor David Blackmon. Now, if you remember, Dr. Fedewa and David Blackmon have been on before, and I was recently on Jacki's show, the Jacki Daily Show, and we will let you know when that comes out. I'm not sure exactly the release date on that, but as soon as we get that information, we will get it to you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, hope you enjoyed the discussion about Trump's first 100 days in office as it pertains to the energy sector. Okay, Dr. Fedewa, the last time we talked, Trump had not taken office. Now we are here. He's been in for 100 days. There's always a lot of speculation over who a president is targeting for various positions when they come into office. And how successful would you say President Trump has been in regards to recruiting and securing the people he wanted?
He's been very, very effective in recruiting. Securing has been a real test because of the lack of cooperation on the Senate, the Senate Democrats particularly. And also, I think, though, the personnel office in the White House is actually not sufficiently effective so far. There's still, really, if you look at the entire recruiting job that a White House is responsible for over a period of the first, let's say, 6 months, it's really about 20,000 people. So it really requires a very major recruiting and interviewing and checking deal. And in fact, they haven't been doing too well on that. And they still have a lot of critical vacancies, particularly in the undersecretary level, which is kind of like middle management, but it's also like in a business, it's like the implementers. So I'd say that they're a little behind on this particular issue.
Jacki, I found the nomination of Rex Tillerson an interesting one. There was a lot of talk about a lot of big oil and gas names to be potentially brought in Trump's administration. To be the CEO of such a large company like Exxon, you have international connections, which means you should be able to make deals, have good connections, lead people. However, it seems that after Tillerson took office, there was a lot of tension with Russia specifically. And as we know, Russia plays a big picture in the energy sector. Do you think that bringing in Tillerson in retrospect was a good move by the Trump administration?
Well, this is a huge topic in Texas where I am, because a lot of people here know Tillerson. In fact, he operated right down the street from me here. And there's no question that, given that Exxon is operated in, I think, 200 countries around the world, this is someone who absolutely has a global mindset and probably more experience doing diplomacy than any member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, for example. So in that sense, he's an excellent pick, and we obviously know he's competent to lead, a company that's larger than many, state agencies that perhaps other people would have run. Or if you look at past secretaries of state, I mean, certainly more experienced than Condoleezza Rice heading up Stanford, for example. The concern was only about potentially a conflict of interest he would have by virtue of the relationships with Russia, which are almost inevitable when you are running a company like Exxon. You have to learn to cooperate if you're going to capitalize on the best opportunities, which sometimes will be with petrostates that don't always align with our interests. As time has gone on, I think people have become more and more assured that Tillerson is going to put the country first. And, the only way you can really know something like that is to see into the heart of the man. I don't know anyone here who speaks ill of Tillerson in terms of his integrity. And he has a 40-year track record, all at Exxon, by the way, which is also kind of unique. So, right now, all I can tell you is that I've been pleased with his performance. He doesn't appear to be favoring the Russians for reasons that should concern us. And as of now, I hear very little backlash among the people who would have the best expertise on this topic.
David, I want to turn to you for a second now. I'm not sure if there's been more of a, at least we talk about left, right, and divisiveness, a nomination than Scott Pruitt. What are your thoughts on Scott Pruitt? Did Trump make the right decision there? And is he the right guy to lead the energy policy from the EPA standpoint moving forward?
Well, yeah, I certainly think he is. He has a long history of dealing with the EPA, although it's mainly been in the courts when he sued them. But he's had a strong interest in how the federal government has regulated the energy industry and the environmental segment of the economy from Washington. Even when some of their responsibilities have been designated to states, they've come in and tried to override the states and issued a bunch of regulations the last few years of the Obama years that he and other attorneys general around the country thought were way overreaching the waters of the United States and things like that. So for this administration, when you have a president whose campaign was based on reining in Washington and reversing a lot of these regulations, I think he's the perfect administrator at EPA. Obviously, it was, a very controversial nomination, but he got through the confirmation process. I think he had a straight party line vote to be confirmed. And he's going to, his big challenge is going to be similar to Rex Tillerson's at State and Ryan Zinke's at Interior. The big challenge is going to be dealing with the bureaucracy, the entrenched professional bureaucracy there. And, as you talked about earlier, the fact that we don't have the deputies and the assistant deputies and all these other secondary political appointees in place means that he's over there right now kind of fighting, he's a one-man show almost, over there fighting a huge bureaucracy, trying to get them to undo some things that, these people passionately believe in. When you look at the professional employee base at the EPA, most of them came out of groups like the Sierra Club and the NRDC and these anti-fossil fuel advocacy groups. And so they really have a passionate distaste for the oil and gas industry and a real belief in what they're doing is saving the world. So it's going to be a big fight for them in the coming years.
Okay, I want to talk about the America First policy. It's kind of loosely came up. Jackie, I want to turn to you here. I've heard you talk about this on your show quite often. Give us some tangible things. Trump talked a lot about America First during the campaign. During his first 100 days, as far as energy policy is concerned, what are some things we can look to and say, yes, he has done this, and is there some areas where maybe he hasn't gone far enough?
So the most obvious one is where he made it very clear that he's pushing for American dominance, energy dominance, as his policy. That implies all kinds of things that we saw in the first 100 days, as far as deregulation, lifting restrictions, directing agencies to rescind or revise Clean Power Plan and get the boot off the neck of producers. So that's all good. Let me tell you what I think is the most underappreciated policy change that he made that really won me over to him, among other things, early on. That is his lifetime lobbying ban on behalf of any foreign nation. What that means to me as someone who worked on Capitol Hill is he's trying to stop what is literally a 50-year trend or tradition of top administration officials, whether Democrat or Republican, marching straight off of Capitol Hill, or rather the White House and the agencies, and into the K Street lobbying firms on behalf of the petrostates. So what I'm telling you is the most powerful people in the past governments have gone to work as lobbyists for Saudi Arabia, or other petrostates. And there is no question that this has had an enormous impact on energy policy in this country and events around the world. So we have a very changed reality since the shale revolution. We're no longer as dependent on events in the Middle East or allies in the Middle East or enemies in the Middle East. And so that lifetime lobbying ban is going to change a lot of things. These folks will never be enticed by a carrot dangling in front of them by a foreign government while they're sitting in their seat. Once you come out of this job, there's a place for you lobbying on behalf of the government of such and such. And it's compromised people for decades. Couldn't be happier. I think it's a big, big deal. And, I just think this is something that was almost overlooked by the press And it would be difficult. I mean, there are entire books written on the impact of this in the past 50 years and explains a lot of complicated relationships that don't often make sense with us and foreign governments that maybe now we can put behind us.
Dr. Fedewa, all of us except for you are sitting in Texas. You are closest to this. That what Jacki brings up. What has been the impact on the ground there? Is it? Are you seeing the implications of what she's talking about being felt through the Beltway?
Yes, that's hard to answer in any global sense, because you've got the other party, which is, I was going to say, half the government. It's certainly not half the Congress anyway, which is the Democrats, that are absolutely and entirely against anything that it seems that Donald Trump has been doing. Now I have to immediately modify that, though, because he got a lot of bipartisan support for the Syrian attack, and I think that there's a lot of watching and waiting to see whether the new policy for North Korea by enlisting China is really going to work or not. But I think it's like a lot of other things. If he succeeds, that he's certainly laying the groundwork for a major overhaul of government policy. Now, you speak of me being close to the bureaucracy. I for 23 years I had a company that was very, very close to working with these guys, or trying to. So I am pretty familiar with the kind of power that they really do have, and trying to turn that battleship, that aircraft carrier, I guess you'd say, in any kind of 2 or 3 year time frame is probably very, very difficult. You have to start at the top, and that's what he's doing. And God, the Lord bless him. I sure hope he succeeds, because if he doesn't, we're all gonna. This may be our last shot.
Brian, can I add a point of clarification to what I said earlier?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say I should have made very clear that I was talking about foreign countries that specifically are competitors with U.S. energy producers, because your question was about America first. So I wasn't so much thinking about China or North Korea. I was thinking specifically about Russia and the OPEC states and other producers that compete with us. And in the past, I think they received preferential treatment out of necessity and out of favoritism based on their relationships with top government officials. And that's what I'm looking forward to seeing a decrease in. So speaking only there of petrostates.
Okay, thank you for that. David, let's turn to you now. Early on, President Trump went after Dakota Access and Keystone and trying to get those projects greenlit using executive orders. What are your thoughts on the use of executive orders to greenlight projects like this? And can we see more of President Trump using the executive order to get his energy policy pushed down the road?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, we've already seen that. Obviously, the executive order on the pipelines had very quick results. Dakota Access has already done their line fill and is about to start actually transporting oil out of the Bakken down to Illinois for refining, and that's already having major impacts on the transportation mix up there in the Midwest and all the way over to the East Coast, which benefits the environment, benefits safety. Transporting oil obviously is much safer in a pipeline than it is on a train, and it's cleaner for the environment. And he's issued a series of other executive orders that will impact and will have a stimulative effect on the oil and gas industry over the next several years. And Jacki talked about how the media kind of missed the significance of that lifetime lobbyist ban, which I totally agree with her about. The media also missed the significance to the oil and gas industry that was contained in his Clean Power Plan executive order, which was reported, by the major news media as a benefit to the coal industry, when in reality it probably is going to have a larger stimulative effect on the oil and gas industry. He did things in that executive order like order the OMB director and the Council of Economic Advisors to rescind this social cost of carbon calculation that they've been doing for the last 6 years on every permitting action by the federal government and to recalculate that to take into effect other factors around social cost of carbon. It's not just carbon; it's also social cost of nitrous oxide and methane. That's going to have that order right there has formed the basis and the justification for a lot of these methane regulations that we saw in the latter part of the Obama administration. Media totally missed that. Totally missed that he ordered the CEQ to rescind the final guidance on consideration of greenhouse gas emissions and effects of climate change in every permitting decision, every regulatory action. And again, that along with that social cost of carbon construct is really formed the basis and the almost the sole justification for a lot of regulatory actions and permit denials and delays and cost increases on the oil and gas industry over the last 6 years. So these are big deals. These are things that are going to have major effects far down the road. Same thing Friday. He issued this executive order on the OCS, the Gulf of Mexico and other waters of the United States that has no real immediate effect. But as the Department of Interior goes through these studies and decision-making processes that he's ordered them to undertake in terms of leasing in the OCS and whether or not to do things in certain areas that the federal government owns, down the line over the next 4, 6, 8 years is going to have a very significant impact. So he's already done it. He'll continue to do it where he can. And frankly, I think already just through his executive orders, he's probably already done more than any other president in my lifetime to actually stimulate the oil and gas industry and encourage its growth in the United States. So he's been a very consequential president already.
Okay. Yeah, the other thing is that if he starts, and I think he will, opening the landmass, we have 26% of the entire landmass of the United States is federal or government operated or owned, and that's been, as we all know, limited access to the industry for a long time. So,
yep,
that also, I mean, that's even maybe bigger than the offshore stuff.
Yeah, let's hold that thought because that's exactly where we're going next. And this is a question for each of you, and we'll start with you, Dr. Fedewa, since you brought it up. Last week, Trump issued an executive order that would allow for the Department of Interior to rescind or resize national monuments. Now, Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke is not so sure that Trump has the power to do this, saying it is untested, as you know, speaking about the president's power, whether the president can do that. Will Trump be able to deliver on these promises to open the federal lands, or is he overextending his bounds here? We'll start with Dr. Fedewa first.
Well, as with most things in Washington, it's some yes and some no. To the extent that these are administrative or management issues or even regulatory issues, he does have the power to go forward without the assent of Congress. Actually, that also has to be taken in context, because if Congress doesn't like something, then they have a lot of power of persuasion and even legal power to start blocking or at least turning public awareness against a particular policy of the president. But generally speaking, if it's something in the Department of Interior that is regulatory or is administrative or management related, the president has the power to act alone. Other things, however, that are in legislation now, he can't go against the law. So those things will have to be changed by the Congress. But frankly, he can do an awful lot before he ever has to go to Congress. So I think he's very aware of that, and he's certainly moving in that direction very, very aggressively.
David, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I can completely agree there. He has done, what he can do by himself, which again, as was just pointed out, is limited by statute. He can't just willy-nilly, go out and change laws that are on the books, but anything that's under his administrative control, like the social cost of carbon construct, the order on climate change, those are completely within his jurisdiction to rescind or change, and he's done that, and he'll continue to do those kinds of things. But ultimately, as we all realize, he's going to have some cooperation from the Congress, and the reality is that even though we like to sit around and complain about the Democrats being obstructionists, and it's been really kind of shameful, quite honestly, the way they've behaved. His biggest problem so far has been the Republicans in Congress not being able to really get any major campaign promises that not just the president, but the members of Congress themselves campaigned on. And tax reform is a really good example of that. That is currently being undertaken, and the president's plan is out there. The House of Representatives has a plan out there for consideration, and there are provisions in that tax plan that could have a huge positive impact on the energy segment of the economy. So hopefully, Congress will be able to get its act together in the coming months, and we'll continue to see some major changes come about.
Jackie, I'm going to give you the final word on this topic. What else did we miss, or would you like to add on this?
So of all the things that have been going on, I think that has to be the least controversial in terms of whether or not the president has the power to do it. I mean, that would seem, I haven't looked into the question, and you would actually need a constitutional lawyer to give you an opinion on some precedents and things like that. But I would have a difficult time understanding how the president wouldn't have that power. Whereas some of his executive orders have been really broad and sweeping and coming down quickly. I'm not sure about all of them. But as to that, I'm not too concerned. I think he has that power.
Okay. That's what we thought about immigration, too.
Well, at least, and with immigration, it's clear that the legislature takes the lead, on some things, and the states take the lead on some things. But, there's actually a division of power there that has to be respected. But as to, executive agencies and national monuments and things like that, I just think there's more deference to the executive branch.
Okay, let's turn to trade policy now. David Blackmon, Trump was on record during the campaign as calling NAFTA the single worst trade deal ever. And initially he said he was going to leave it. Now there's talks of renegotiating it. What does this mean for the energy sector? Trump kind of backing off his talk of leaving the NAFTA trade agreement.
Well, it could have some fairly significant impacts. We export an awful lot of natural gas into Mexico, for example. That doesn't necessarily fall under NAFTA, but if you have the administration, taking the United States out of NAFTA, and if that should cause, tensions to get very high between the United States and Mexico, and also Canada. We ship a lot of natural gas into Canada, and also obviously import a lot of oil from both of those countries. And so, technically, NAFTA probably doesn't have a gigantic impact on oil and gas, but if you end up in some kind of a trade war between the United States and those two countries, then you could really have some very significant impacts on the oil and gas business. So, hopefully, I think what we see with President Trump that, of course, the news media likes to ignore is that he always he views everything as a negotiation. Everything to him is a negotiation, and he always begins the rhetoric on any issue with the most extreme position he thinks he can take, and then he negotiates. And I think we saw exactly that happen last week. There was this sudden announcement, I think, on Wednesday that the president was about to take the United States out of NAFTA, and then by Friday he'd had conversations with the president of Mexico and the premier in Canada, and now a negotiation is underway. And I think what we'll end up seeing is a revision of that trade deal, but not the United States pulling out of it.
Jackie, just like the NAFTA agreement, there was a lot of talk about the Paris Climate Agreement and President Trump's actions on what he would do there. What are your thoughts on what President Trump has said, and what impact could we see if we do pull out of that agreement?
Well, I mean, the truth is that no one is really acting according to the agreement anyway. I don't think in the United States. There's never been buy-in, and there are plenty of arguments against the fact, whether or not it was ever effectively implemented. The people, Republicans inside the Senate will tell you it was never effective. because they had no input, and Congress was never going to appropriate the money to comply. So, I almost think, as we used to say years ago in law school, unenforced law is no law at all, and international law, more than any other, falls in that category. So I think this is more, the whole agreement is more of a PR piece for the Green movement and an aspiration. If Hillary had been elected, it'd be a different story, because they would just railroad it through if they followed in the footsteps of Obama, with or without respect of the separation of powers and the process of the law. So that we would, pretty much ignore it at this point should come as a surprise to no one. And I think that really what the president should do is make a very strong affirmative statement in the opposite direction, and say, because even if you don't pass a law per se or have an executive order necessarily, even a statement from a president, from the appropriate agency, saying, we don't respect this law, we find it to be unenforceable in the U.S. for the following reasons, and this is the position that we're going to take in any legal action, even that can have force. So at a minimum, you should be doing that. But as those parts require just executive action, he should obviously, and has, worked to roll back nearly everything that Obama did in that area. And that's good. It's preserving U.S. sovereignty and really just good for the country overall.
Dr. Fedewa, I want to talk about Mexico. A lot of companies that I know, that we're talking normal small businesses, have invested a lot of money in Mexico, specifically on energy-related projects. During the campaign, President Trump had a lot of strong words talking about Mexico, and since he's been in office, there's been a lot of talk about what will he actually do with the Mexican government. Kind of break down the hype from reality on what Trump has actually done during the first 100 days as far as trade negotiations and relationships with the Mexican government.
Well, I think the most important thing he did was already been mentioned by David, and that is he maneuvered the president of Mexico into begging him to renegotiate NAFTA. So, and I would like to underline that point that he made so well, and that is, you have to understand that this man is a businessman, and that means he's very transactional. Everything is a transaction, and the people in Washington just cannot understand that. They say that, for example, when he uses his rapport with the president of China to help on the Korean issue, and he doesn't make a big issue about currency manipulation, that suddenly he's changed his mind. That's not the case at all. He's getting what he wants out of China. The same thing with Mexico. Now, in terms of the specifics, how is the renegotiation going to work? What is going to be the impact on manufacturing, on retail, and particularly also on energy? That's to be determined. But I do believe that the fact that we are now facing that kind of a question is a giant step forward.
Okay, Jacki, I want to turn to you for a second here. Let's talk about ISIS. ISIS has made a lot of attempts to control oil assets in the Middle East. What do you think about Trump? He's talked a lot about how he's going to interact with ISIS. How has he interacted with them, and does ISIS really have the capacity to affect the oil market?
Well, I think the only interaction he's really announced is the destruction of them, as far as I know. And certainly for as long as no one, we leave a vacuum and no one intervenes, then they can control Iraq oil until the pushback is effective, and it is, and it's going to be. So, we should expect to see the people of Iraq retake control of their energy assets, and that's important because at capacity they're about the second largest producer in OPEC, and sitting right in between one of the largest Sunni powers and one of the largest Shiite powers. So we need to care a lot, I think, about stability there to prevent broader war breaking out. I almost think at this point that ISIS is secondary, because I really think that their days are numbered based on the way things are going. I'm actually surprised it's taken as long as it's taken. And soon we'll be talking about someone else, and people will, I think, forget that they ever existed. But it's a hydra. I mean, they're just going to reform it under a different name in a different place, but hopefully a place that doesn't control quite so much energy assets. Because again, the way from where I'm sitting, I see world events in terms of how it impacts U.S. producers and their future, in addition to everything else. So, maybe we'll see more stability in Iraq, and that might actually bring a lot more online and make energy prices go down even further. But that's very secondary, I think, to your question.
Right. David Blackmon, to you here. Past presidents have been accused of giving too much to the members of OPEC, kind of manipulating our foreign policy to make sure that the Saudis specifically are happy. Have you been pleased with how Trump's dealt with them for the first 100 days of his administration?
Oh, yeah, sure. And, this question really goes to the entire strategy of the America First energy plan. The whole plan is built around, promoting United States, not independence, energy independence, but energy security, lessening our reliance on oil coming in from the Middle East and North Africa, so that we our compelling national interest that we've had for 60 years to keep the Straits of Hormuz open diminishes. We're engaged. When President Trump took office, we were engaged militarily, the United States, in 7 different civil war conflicts in North Africa and the Middle East, 7 different countries. And a lot of that is, anti-terrorist activities, obviously, fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other things in other countries in Somalia and Afghanistan. But a lot of it is also just protecting the security interests of the United States, to make sure that oil keeps coming into our refineries here. The president campaigned at every campaign stop, talked about the need for the United States to reduce its dependence on that oil from the Middle East as a national security issue. It's not just an energy issue. It's a national security issue. And, the day we stop importing oil from that part of the world is the day we don't have to keep sending our military people into every conflict that takes place over there. So yeah, it's and I've been happy. Yes, I've been very happy with the president's relationships with Saudi Arabia. He does have a strong relationship there. Rex Tillerson obviously has a very strong relationship there. But again, the whole strategy of the America First energy plan is to reduce our reliance on OPEC countries in general, but mainly the Middle East part of the world.
How are we doing?
I think we're doing pretty well. It's going to be years before you're able to really see the outcome of these policy changes. But there's no question the administration has already implemented a 180-degree change in direction of federal policy on energy. But a lot of these things you're talking about, redoing regulations, reanalyzing and changing policies at Interior, and at the State Department, that's going to take years to implement. But I think overall, you'd have to say he's off to a good start.
Okay, well, this will bring us to our final segment of the show today. Trump's first 100 days, it's a pass or fail grade for him. Has he passed? Has he failed? And we're going to let Dr. Fedewa lead us off again.
Well, I would say that he's probably, I have to put on my professor hat again. I would say I'd probably give him a B. I think he's done a lot with what he can do, which is in the regulatory issue area and the executive order issue arena. He has not. I think he underestimated the difficulties that he was going to face in the legislature, particularly. Well, so far we've seen the House, but that's nothing compared to what we're going to see in the Senate. So I think he's underestimated that to some extent. I think he's a fast learner. He's coming around, and I really believe that much of the in fact, I wrote a column on this, that I believe much of the problem with the repeal and replace Obamacare really was misjudgments on the part of Paul Ryan, who he should have gotten the popular acceptance and momentum behind that before he started introducing it as a legislation. But that's another topic. Anyway, I would give him I would say that in the thing that he can control personally and through his executive office, he's done quite well. The major problem at going forward, I think, there are two things. One is he has to get a better grip on how to get legislation passed, which I think he's starting to do. Having the Senate up to the White House, the entire 100-person Senate up to the White House to talk about North Korea, I think was a masterstroke. And then the other issue, though, is still this personnel issue. He's got to get that second, third team in there if he really is going to carry this thing through for a successful 4 years. So I'd say a B, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues here to give their assessments.
David, let's go to you. What do you say?
Yeah, I think everything Dr. Fedewa just said was fair. I probably would up it to a B plus, just because I do think he's done the things that he can control. He's been very aggressive, and I think one of the things that is underestimated is the psychology. The change in the industry's psychology from November 8th until today is amazing, and psychology plays such a big role in determining how willing companies are to risk their money in new energy projects. If the oil and gas industry has been an abused child for the last 8 years. And today it is a very confident industry, so much more confident than it was just 6 months ago. And that's a very important thing, because that helps to it encourages more investment, higher risk taking. And as we all know, this industry's an extremely high risk industry. So I think that's all good. And I totally agree. He's got to find a way to have a better relationship with Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell specifically, but also the Democrats in the Senate in particular, not the House. That's not important. There's a big enough Republican majority. But in the Senate, he's going to need Democratic votes to get the Obamacare repeal and replace done, to get a tax bill done, to even get a full budget done for the second time in 11 years. That would be a major achievement. But it's going to take Democratic votes, and how you get there is going to be a walking a tightrope. But right now, I think it'd have to be B plus, and it could even go up to an A by the end of the year, depending on what happens.
Jackie, you get the last word.
Well, I'm definitely going to give an A on energy policy. It's hard to imagine how he can move it faster and have better appointments, than what he has shown us. And I would also add to that, Jeff Sessions is someone who should not be overlooked, because let's not forget, he's the chief law enforcement officer, and that includes, inside Department of Justice, the Environment and Natural Resources Division, which enforces Clean Power Plant, Clean Water Act, and all of that. All the big settlements against energy companies are done there. And wow, he can do a lot, and he will do a lot, I think, to help. So he's put everyone in place and looked at the restrictions to let the economy grow to help him out for his re-elect, which is super smart. All he needs to do, get out of the way, and things will grow. So, given everything else he's had to balance, and we're only 100 days in, which is, we're just getting started. I personally couldn't be happier. I couldn't have written the agenda better myself. So now as to everything else, I might grade him differently. But on energy alone and environment policy, I give him an A.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for coming on. We appreciate your time. We will link to all of y'all's information in the show notes so the listeners can find you at your respective places. It was a pleasure, and enjoyed it, and hope to talk to all of you again soon.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Okay, well, thanks to all the guests. Again, check out the show notes where you can find their bio and all their information. Really enjoyed the discussion about Trump's first 100 days. What do you think? Let me know. GlobalEnergyMedia.com/contact. Would love to hear from you. And if you have a roundtable discussion idea for us, let us know. Always drop us a line. We'd love to hear back from you. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Until next time, keep climbing.
Thanks for listening to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.